Let's now look at the technique preferred by the old experts. So now I'm going to fish the method that the two authors advocate. That's to say, the lost art of, well, it is now the lost art of fishing wet flies upstream. I'm going to pick my way up the length of this run right up to that poppy water ahead of me, about 50 yards. 50 yards of fishing here. It's lovely water. I've now got, to try to make it look authentic, I've got a wading staff which is lanyarded to me, because definitely in those days they'd have had a wading staff. This would have had a big bow landing net at the top of it, a fixed landing net. I've just got a wading staff. The authors talk about a short line. In fact, they say, including cast, they didn't call them leaders, they called them casts, including cast no longer than the rod. And the rods they use were about 10 feet to 12 feet long. I'm going to use a slightly longer amount of line out. And this should be called not just upstream wet fly, but upstream fast wet fly, because they allow the fly to stay on the water a very short amount of time. Just a short drift. And Stewart says the moment the fly hits the water is the deadliest time. So just going to take a little bit more line off. The other advantage about this method of fishing, and they talk about it in the book, is that you can approach quite close to fish, which is why, of course, you're only using a short line. So short line and many casts. You'll have noticed, and I don't suggest for 1 minute that they did this, but it's force of habit with me. I just make that little mandatory tap of the rod tip before I make my next cast. And I'm glad I brought my wading staff with me today. This is a nice bit here by that big rock. Often you see a fish rising just off that one. Well, just a little bit more of this particular pocket to fish, and then up into the next one, continue going up. Another good one ahead of me. It's a bit up and down. Here's the wading. Oops. There were a fish. First fish I've seen rise for ages. Got him. Well, you can't win them all, and sometimes you do win one. Not a big fish, but nevertheless, in a situation like today, with few fish rising, that was the only fish I've seen rise for 2 hours. And he took as soon as fly went past him. What's he taking? He's taking Stewart's black spider. Good old WC Stewart. Whoops. Nice little brownie. What we need to see now is another fish or three rising. But by this other big rock there, there's a fish or two. I've had them in the past. Just want to see a fish flash up like that last one. Took it in right close to that big rock. Try one over at the tail of it. And the other thing to make sure is that you lead the whole lot downstream, keeping it in the current. And as I said earlier, you can see there is a little bit of a resemblance here to the high sticking technique, except the flies aren't deep. It does help enormously if you've got rising fish, which is what we certainly haven't got today, for whatever reason. It's come cool after a hot spell, which I would have thought would have played into my hands, because it's been baking hot for about 10 days, stifling hot in places, and temperatures dropped like a stone, so I would have thought it maybe was a little bit better fishing conditions. But we've also had the strong wind this morning. Wind's dropped now, dropped considerably. Yellow May on the surface there coming down. These big sulphur duns are becoming more and more common in Yorkshire. There we go. Well, that was a nice take. That was an underwater run with that. Not a big fish. Not a big fish at all, but nevertheless a nice take. Come here. Black spider again. Little wildy. Beautifully spotted. Away he goes. How the hell's that happened? I've been fishing with a wraparound for 5 minutes. One of the problems with not using your line hand, I suppose. Well, I did just see a fish rise on my way back down, just off the point of this boulder here. So I'm just going to have one last crack at it. It was tucked in pretty tight behind that boulder, and it may be almost a case of having to dibble the fly. He almost brushed the side of the boulder, he was so close. Ha! Another sprat. Would you believe it? Look at the size of it. Tiny little wild brownie. That one took the water in. Well, I've just had a break for a sandwich and a pot of tea, and while I've been sat down, the rain clouds have blown in. It looks any minute as though it's going to dump on me from above, so I don't want it to at this precise moment, but when it does rain, I want it to rain for at least 2 days solid to bring this river up and freshen it up a little bit. So I'm going to probably go over there and try under those trees, but if you do that, fish your way across, of course. So still short lining, still watching for a take. And I know that this is quite like semi-underwater ravines, so you've just got to be a little bit careful with your leading foot when you're wading, and then it throws up again onto a centre plateau. So just feel with your foot and work your way across, and provided you've got good anchorage with one foot, you should be all right. But remember one of these things. So the bit I'm going over to is over there. Search out that little calm bit behind that current break. I'm working at 2 rod lengths and no more. Preferably 1 rod length. And from this position I can command the other side of the river equally as well. So from here now I can start making short drifts into this area. The wading is tricky because it's limestone ridges. It's sort of edge on, if you like, literally like a ridge. So you have got to be a little bit wary of where you're placing your feet. Keep focused and ready to tighten. Fish. I thought one would make a mistake sooner or later. Just saw the line stop and lifted into it. It's not a big fish, but as I say, a fish is a fish is a fish. I'll steer it into this slack bit here if I can, if it'll play ball. Come on, sunshine. So there you are. There's a fish to Stewart's spider, Stewart's black spider. Nice little wild wharf brownie. I'm really delighted to see there's so many wild fish, small wild fish turning up. He just put his head in the stream. That's great to see, is that? Look at the big black spots on him and 1 or 2 of the red ones. Nice fish. Put him in this steadier water here, give him a bit of a chance to swim off. Go on, away you go. And he's away. Well, there you are, a few fish, but they're all wildies, and they were all taken by the old lost art of the upstream wet fly. Stewart says that there is only need for 3 spider patterns: the black, the dun and the red. Those are the ones that he pinned his faith on. Today I fished a black spider at point, a dun spider middle dropper. I kept changing that for a yellow spider, one of my own patterns. And on the top dropper I used the Edmonds and Lee pattern I used a watering blower and I changed that for another fly which is not in Edmonds and Lee's book, that was hare's lug and plover. But essentially you're going to look at the river surface and see what's hatching. That's the drill that everybody should follow. And once you see flies coming down, try to match them in your box of spiders. The black spider is undoubtedly a good pattern. That's the James Bailey's black spider. Is undoubtedly a good pattern when black gnats, reed smuts, or any of the little black stuffs on the surface. So a black spider is an excellent bet anywhere on your leader. But Stewart reckoned that I reckon he fished it at point position, because when he does his comparisons with other positions, it always comes out top. And the dun spider's good for any of the olives, I would suggest, and his red spider is probably good when small sedges are on. Without a doubt, you need rising fish for this method, and another day can be just as different. You can find yourself on a riverbank with fish rising all over the place. And I have to tell you, this method, it does catch fish like hell. I've had some fantastic days fishing using upstream wet fly techniques with a rod length of line out. So, you know, give it a whirl. Stop facing downstream and letting the fish hang themselves on. Turn round, face upstream, and you do the fishing. You hook the fish. You see the fish rise. You can have a wading staff by your side. You don't need your line hand fiddling with the fly line, and you'll do the tightening into the fish, and it's so much more fun. So give it a go.